Transform your startup journey with the Energy Tech Nexus. Connect with fellow founders, access critical resources, and be part of a community shaping the future of energy and carbon tech. Your path to building a Thunder Lizard starts here. Learn more at energytechnexus.com. Welcome back to the show. We're here with William Taggart IV. He's worked on major projects in deep water oil and gas, shale oil, copper mining, and refineries. His initial 16 years was spent with a consulting engineering firm in New Orleans, and he's worked for a mid-sized oil company designing and troubleshooting oil and gas facilities in deep water Gulf of Mexico, Eagle Ford Shale, Permian Shale, and internationally. He's recognized as a subject matter expert for control systems and process safety systems for industrial processes. And we'll get into it later. He's also written a book on fixing America. But today we're talking about long duration storage, specifically a company William has started called Cavern Energy Storage. So William, why don't you tell us about the premise behind Cavern Energy?
So about 4 years ago, I walked away from the oil industry. I'd had enough. I sat down and I looked at what we needed in America. What was going to be the next step for me? And once you start looking at the electricity markets, you realize that with the increasing amounts of renewables, you need energy storage. And the Department of Energy even has what they call the Energy Storage Grand Challenge, where they've recognized that we need a lot of energy storage to support renewables in the future. So they figure by 2050, we need like 1,000 gigawatts of energy storage. So once I started looking at that, I started thinking about, okay, well, how do you do energy storage? Well, the old technology, the present, the major source of long duration energy storage right now is a technology called pump storage hydroelectric. It's a simple technology. You pump water up a mountain to a lake higher up on the mountain to store electricity. That water, when it flows down through a hydroelectric turbine, regenerates the electricity to put it back on the grid. It is 95% of worldwide energy storage. It's been around since, I think the first one was in Switzerland in like 1905, somewhere in that area. So it's an old technology. Well, good luck finding a mountain in Texas. That's not going to work. There's a few spots around El Paso that might be able to do it, but really you need a very tall mountain. The bigger the elevation difference between the two lakes, the better the energy storage. So once I knew that wasn't going to work, I started looking at other things. Now, way back when in college, I actually summer interned on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So that's the Department of Energy's oil storage system where they've got 60 underground salt dome caverns. They have a capacity of over 700 million barrels of oil. So once you start thinking about that, you can realize that you can do underground pump storage hydroelectric. So you can use those 2 salt dome caverns built at different elevations within the salt dome, and that becomes your 2 reservoirs. You put compressed air on them, that raises the surface pressure. You can locate your pump turbine on the surface. So it took me about a year and a half to work out all the numbers, to figure out all the details and go, okay, yeah, I got something. Mm-hmm. I went to a conference in South Dakota. The Salt Dome Cavern people have a group called the Solution Mining Research Institute. That's their technology group. I went up to their conference. I did a 30-minute presentation. Here's my technology, blow a hole in it. And they went, no, we love it. We think it'll work. So I was like, okay, we got something. Mm-hmm. So since then, we've been working on getting it funded. We're working with Department of Energy on some grant applications. We've got about 2 pending at the moment, and we'll just keep working more until we can get some money. But the technology is pretty solid. It's the market that I'm lacking at the moment. In Texas right now, the batteries, we're seeing an enormous explosion in batteries, lithium-ion batteries. And the batteries are kind of saturating the market. So at the moment, there's really not an interest in long-duration energy storage because what you're competing against is the batteries, but more importantly, you're competing against the peaker natural gas power plants. These natural gas turbines that can come online quickly, supply electricity, and go offline. With $2 per MCF natural gas at the moment, I can't compete against that. That's so cheap. So my thought right now is we are going to keep developing this technology and we're going to wait and see. I'm very sure natural gas prices are going to rise in the future. And when they do, this technology will be far more competitive at that point.
I'm just curious, when you did this research, what was that focused on? Was that also focused on underground pump storage hydroelectric, or are there other use cases of using those salt domes?
So the salt dome caverns so what happens is you've got this large salt dome, this large solid body of salt. And what they discovered in the 1940s was they could drill into it inject water, solution mine the salt. Actually, they were doing solution mining before that, but they didn't realize they were making these caverns. So you inject water, you bring up the salt, you have salt. Your whole thing is to get the salt. Well, now when they realize, oh, hey, we have these caverns that we're creating. So in the 1940s, they started storing oil, natural gas, butane, propane. So we've been doing that since the 1940s. In fact, there are salt dome caverns under construction right now to supply salt to the chemical plants, sodium and chloride as basic building blocks of a lot of chemical reactions, but also to create caverns for natural gas storage. So that's one of the nice things about this technology is everybody asks, is there a regulatory issue? No, they're building caverns right now. So it's an easy solution for us. So the caverns were a known technology. I'm just taking two established known technologies and merging them together to create a way to do pump storage hydroelectric underground. Pump storage hydroelectric underground has been a thought for a while. There's been some ideas about converting old mine shafts, converting other things. But actually what I found was there are patents from the 1970s and 1980s where people had thought about doing pump storage hydroelectric underground in salt domes. I thought I was a genius when I figured this out, and lo and behold, I find all these old patents where people had thought of it. But we did get a patent awarded. Cavern Energy Storage holds a patent. The patent is on how to build the caverns and build the unit. The old designs from the 70s and 80s were not constructible. It was going to be very hard to build them economically. With the advances in drilling technologies that we've had from the shale drilling industry, we now have drilling rigs that can drill very large boreholes. So we now have a constructible technology that'll work. So that's the change, is that it's a underground pump storage hydroelectric has always been known about, but then the technology has changed to the point where we can economically build it.
And do you need, like, you said there's like a altitude differential that you take advantage of.
So one cavern will be about 1,200 feet above the other cavern. So we're creating a 1,200 foot, trying to convert into meters, like 400 meter height difference between the two that lets you store the energy. So you take, if you take a cubic meter of brine and you move it up 1,200 feet, you've stored a kilowatt hour of electricity. So you've got to move a lot of fluid, and that's all the pump storage hydro technologies have this fact of you've got to move a lot of fluid to store a lot of electricity. But the thing is, you've got these huge reservoirs. There's a facility in Virginia called Bath County. It's 3,000 megawatt rated, and it stores 20 hours. So, I mean, that's 60 gigawatts of electricity right there that they can store. I mean, that's an incredible amount. And that's why pump storage hydro is really good, because you can do these big volume storages.
And you said 400 meters. Is that because it gives you that nice kilowatt ratio, or is there another magic reason you're picking that?
Oh, there's always a magic reason, Jason. So in this case, it's a question of the hydroelectric turbine. There is what's called a Francis turbine. It is a reversible. It can function as a pump or as a turbine. And it's got a limit of about 1,200 feet, 1,500 feet.
And this is head pressure.
Head pressure is right. The difference between the head pressure across the turbine is determined by the difference in elevation between the two caverns. I was talking with some of the people at Sage Geosystems, and they're going to use what's called a Pelton turbine. And by doing that, they can have a much higher pressure difference across the turbine, but it's not reversible. Pelton turbine has other restrictions on it that make it good for Sage, but bad for Cavern. So that's why we're going with the Francis turbine.
Okay.
Interesting.
But yeah.
Because we had Sage Geosystems on here, Cindy, and they talked about their technology, and they are also using pressure. So how is that different than what you're doing?
So what Sage is doing is they're taking water on the surface and pushing it down into the ground and pressuring up underground. So their high pressure reservoir is underground. Their low pressure reservoir is on the surface. But it's the same basic idea. We're moving fluid and causing it to go to a higher pressure state, a no more potential energy state to store the electricity. What Cavern's doing is our high pressure reservoir is underground, and then our low pressure reservoir is underground as well at a deeper elevation. So we don't have anything on the surface. We actually take up less than 10% of the surface area. And as a result, if you want to install solar panels or wind farms or let the farmer keep grazing his cattle, yeah, we're fine with that. That works fine. So it's two different technologies. Now, the thing is with the salt domes, salt's actually impervious. So the fluid doesn't escape. It's never going to lose pressure. It's, we could store energy there and leave it there for as long as we want. With sage, they're actually having some small fluid loss off into the formation and also through evaporation on the surface. So they're losing some fluid that they've got to replace. So that's one advantage that Cavern has over sage. Sage is going to have a lower capital cost, but I think there's some technical challenges they've got to get over as well.
I also think sage is also harvesting the heat.
Oh yeah,
the heat
which is a
having
little different.
The heat's having some impact, but very little from what I've seen so far.
Yeah. So I think that different use cases, different solutions, right? In some ways, because of you're very much focused on the energy storage component.
Well, and the thing is, so sage can go anywhere or more. They have much more sites that they can use. Cavern, we're locked in with salt domes, and that's a limitation. But there's 160 salt domes on the Gulf Coast that we can get access to, and looking through all those salt domes, the available acreage and everything, we can build 50 gigawatts of energy storage. That's 20-hour energy storage. So that's 1,000 gigawatt hours we can store. That would cover most of what East Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi needed in the future.
And are you using the brine that's already there? Or are you injecting water?
So the salt dome, as you find it, is solid salt. So you drill a well bore into it, you inject water down, the water contacts the salt and becomes brine. And then you just keep pushing water down, keep taking the brine out until you build the cavern or dissolve enough salt to form the cavern that you're looking to do. Now, the trick here is, and this is the advantage that I have over conventional pump storage hydro, I take the brine, I remove the salt, I then reuse the water to keep forming the caverns, and I sell the salt. So my thing is, if I can find a salt market that will take the salt, then I've got something that is a revenue source that can offset some of my construction costs, and that makes my economics better.
And you can sell that salt as like renewable salt or market it that way.
Renewable salt.
That way.
So actually, the biggest salt market in the U.S. is road salt. For salting the roads to keep, during the winter and all that. And we have about a 50 million ton salt market. I think the edible salt is like 10% or less of that.
Right.
But the big bulk of it is road salt.
It's road salt, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what we would go after. That way we don't have to worry about meeting any food quality requirements. Although you could do it that way.
Yeah. I'm very curious about the history of salt domes, because you said they were kind of discovered in the 40s. And I know this is a bit of a tangent. But how did they see salt domes? Because do they have seismic back then?
So we've known about salt domes longer than that, actually. And the thing is, there's actually salt domes in Poland and in Germany that were close enough to the surface where people discovered them, and they mined into them from conventional mining.
Okay.
In fact, there's
just taking blocks of salt away.
Just drill down and mine it out, dig it out the salt. And I don't know when they started doing that. I think it was like in the 1600s. I mean, it's been around for a long time. And there's actually a cathedral that's been carved into a salt dome. I think it's in Poland. Don't quote me on that because I'm working off of memory here. But that's how we've known about salt domes for a long time. Now, the fun thing about on the Gulf Coast, when the salt dome forms, there's a large, thick salt bed from an old lake deep underground. And as the rock pressure pushes down on it, that salt bubbles up. As it bubbles up through the rock above, it bends and breaks the rock layers. And that forms what the oil and gas people call traps. So oil and gas will form against the edge of the salt dome. So one of the things when I was working in oil and gas, you knew where a salt dome was because you'd have a ring of oil wells around a central point with no oil wells in the middle. That was a salt dome.
Interesting.
And if you go look at the topography maps on the offshore shelf and everything in the Gulf of Mexico, you'll see these lumps. And those are salt domes. These are salt domes pushing from below, pushing rock up to form like an underground mountain, an underwater mountain, I should say. And around the edge, you'll see lots of oil platforms because that's where the oil's at. Crazy. So, we've known about salt domes for a while. In fact, here in Houston to the west, there's a salt dome called Hockley in Hockley, Texas, and there's an active salt mine there. They've drilled in from above and they're mining out salt. There's another one in Grand Saline, Texas, near Dallas. A couple salt mines actually in Louisiana. And if you want to watch a really crazy YouTube video, back in the 80s, a Texaco oil platform was on a lake in Louisiana drilling for oil. and they missed the oil and gas reservoir, but they hit the salt mine next door, and the whole lake went down the wellbore into the salt mine. Nobody was killed, but there's some amazing video of barges going into the hole that formed, and now that lake has this deep pit that links into the salt mine.
Oh my gosh.
And it's all flooded.
Yeah.
And it just isn't. This has been, working out this technology has led me into rabbit holes of data that I never would have thought about.
Yeah, and YouTube videos. So what do I research to find this YouTube video?
Look up, I'm trying to remember the name of the lake. It's Louisiana salt mine disaster. Look up that, and that should be able to get you to the video. It was a Texaco rig. What was the name of the lake? I'll remember in a moment.
It's fascinating.
And it's amazing. I was amazed that salt bubbles up, and I guess you have to remember in geologic time, rocks can be a little bit like liquid.
Well, and the thing is, the salt is lighter than the rock, so it's just like when you have like bubbles of oil coming up through the water. When you mix up a salad dressing, you see that same thing of the lighter fluid trying to rise through the heavier fluid.
Yeah, and I think the other thing you indicated is, the reason the time is now is because the drilling of shale wells have allowed us to have bigger bore sizes.
What's happened is the drilling rigs have become stronger.
Okay.
We're now, I know the worldwide, I think it's a 5-mile lateral has been drilled. So with the shale well, what you do is you drill down and then you turn the drill bit and you drill out to the side. Well, we started out drilling 1-mile laterals, 1 mile sideways. And now I know worldwide, they've drilled 5 miles sideways. And I think in the US, we're up to 3 or 4 miles. I can't remember the number exactly. But the farther you drill to the side, the more horsepower the rig has to have. Because you've got to turn that drill bit and you get the resistance of all the pipe and the hole that you've drilled through. So the longer you want to drill, the bigger the horsepower of the rig. So we've now got rigs that have a lot of horsepower. So that lets those rigs be able to drill large diameter well bores straight down into the salt. So that's one of the challenges. With pump storage hydro, you don't want to lose, as the fluid flows through the pipes, which in these cases are going to be the well bores, you don't want to have pressure drop. So you want as big a pipe as possible to reduce that pressure drop. Because any pressure drop is lost electricity. It's wasted electricity. It reduces your efficiency. So we can now drill 36-inch, 48-inch big well bores that will let us do these type of projects. In the 1960s, we drilled a couple wells that were 4 foot, 5 foot in diameter, but those were science experiments done by the government. But now we've got the rigs where we can do it consistently. In fact, that was one of the concerns I had when I went to the Solution Mining Research Institute conference in South Dakota, because I'd run the numbers and I was like, oh my God, normal oil wells are 8-inch, 12-inch. I'm looking at 24-inch or 36-inch, and I'm going, whoa, that's a big well bore. And after I'd done presenting, there's what's called the Louisiana Offshore Oil Port. These guys run there's an oil rig that's an old rig that's offshore that a tanker can pull up, unload its oil. And then they take the oil inshore through pipelines and they store it in salt dome caverns because they want to unload the tanker as fast as possible and get him out. And then they ship the oil slowly off to refineries. And the lead engineer for them came up to me afterwards. He said, yeah, you're worried about those big well bores? I drill those all the time.
It's like a standard pipe kind of size. Yeah.
And at that point, I realized everything I need is off the shelf. There's nothing lacking at the moment.
Yeah. Interesting.
What are some of the risks associated with the technology that you're still working out?
So the one risk we're still looking at is corrosion. So you've got a saturated salt brine. And the salt dome cavern operators, they've been dealing with saturated salt brines for years, but they don't move fluid very often. They'll fill the cavern once a week or fill once a month. They don't move fluid daily. We're going to be moving fluid daily back and forth through a hydroelectric turbine. So one of the grants we have pending is for us to work with Texas A&M's College of Engineering. They've got what they call their Material Science Engineering Group. And we've got a grant pending that will let us get with them and have them do a metallurgy study to determine what is the optimum metallurgy that we need. We've also got a hydroelectric turbine vendor teed up and ready to go so that as the Texas A&M guys go, well, we're going to test the metal X, Y, and Z, the turbine vendor can go, yeah, well, I can't make a turbine out of Z, so forget that. Throw that one out. So we're ready to do this work. We just need financing. We need the funding. The other challenge is the market. The way ERCOT is set up as an energy market doesn't help long duration energy storage. It's all through arbitrage, buy low, sell high, and that is a market. That's a market that fluctuates a lot. So we don't have a constant revenue stream at the moment, and that's true for all the long duration energy storage solutions out there. The market is still developing, and until the market fully develops. Now, one of the things that just happened like 2 days ago, the California Public Utility Commission directed CAISO, the California grid operator, to get long-duration energy storage, buy some long-duration energy storage, which in California's case is going to be conventional pump storage hydro. That's the first time we've seen somebody actually go out and say, you will get this. We've got 22 gigawatts of pump storage in the United States. It was built mainly in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, in that time frame. And it was mainly built in conjunction with nuclear power plants. Once you build a nuclear power plant, you want to run it 24/7. You do not want to, you want to make as much money as possible off that thing. And a nuclear power plant runs at its best when it's running at a constant power output. Problem with that is consumer demand is not constant. So at night, we need less electricity. So the nuclear operators were like, well, what are we going to do? And they built a lot of pump storage hydro. So they charge it at night and then discharge it during the day to allow the nuclear power plants to be more what they call base load, more, running full power output. One of the things we're seeing internationally right now is China has built 50 gigawatts of pump storage hydro. They've surpassed us, and only in the last 20 years. And they've got another 87 gigawatts in construction. So China has made the decision that they're going to invest in pump storage hydro and renewables. People talk about how they're building more coal power plants. They're building a lot more renewables. And they're building the pump storage hydro to go with it because they recognize with renewables, with the variability of the renewable, you need a long duration energy storage to go with it. Now, in the US, we're not doing that. We're using tax incentives, we're encouraging stuff, but we're not investing in long duration energy storage like we should. If you look right now at the Department of Energy, and don't quote me on the numbers, I think I probably am going to give you the wrong numbers, but I think it's like $9 billion for hydrogen, $8 billion for carbon capture, $3.5 billion for advanced nuclear. Department of Energy is only spending $500 million on long duration energy storage. And so, these are big, high capital projects. So as a result, we don't have any long duration energy storage in construction, any pump storage in construction at the moment. Now, this California directive is going to change that. There's a number of projects in California that are shovel ready to go, and we'll see what they do.
Yeah. And I think this is like the challenge we constantly come back to is on the energy trilemma, right? For years, we've focused on how do we try to get lowest cost, but not necessarily prioritizing sustainability, decarbonization. And so the mechanisms in ERCOT just don't exist for them to value.
Well, but think about it. For a long duration energy storage, you're running on arbitrage. That means you need cheap electricity prices when electricity is not in demand.
Can you define long duration, how that's different from a battery? Yeah.
So lithium-ion batteries are 1 to 4 hours. Department of Energy defines long duration as 8 hours or more. And then there's a new term that's being used called seasonal storage, which is like 100-hour duration storage. So if you could store 1 megawatt, 100 hours of 1 megawatt electricity, you would be what's called seasonal storage. Form energy batteries, the iron air batteries, those are what they are what we're thinking of as seasonal storage.
And is the idea that you would store that for, like, you build it up over a month, and then why is it called seasonal? Okay.
Well, if you look at
100 hours is not a season.
100 hours isn't a season, but what you look at is for ERCOT, what we have is we have a huge summer demand. We then have these winter storms that give us these massive sharp peaks, but our spring and our falls are very mild. We use maybe 60% of the electricity we use in the summer during the spring and the fall. So in the spring or the fall, you would charge these 100-hour batteries up to be able to deal with the winter peaks and with these the massive summer
and you still might only need them for like 5 or 10 hours in those peak periods.
Something
right. But you're
like that,
taking advantage of the fact that power might have a negative cost at some point.
Yeah. I looked at how the grid would operate if we took all the coal and natural gas offline, and I needed 2 types of storage. I needed a daily storage to move solar from day to night, and that was the underground pump storage hydroelectric. I modeled that as the solution there. And then you needed a seasonal storage to take all that excess solar and excess wind in the spring and the fall and move it into the months of the summer and these winter spikes as well. So anyway, we've got it. So that's what Department of Energy says. They define batteries as 1 to 4 hours, short duration. Long duration is 8 to 24 hours or longer. And now we're starting to see more of this definition of seasonal being 100-hour plus. And I forgot what the original question was before that.
The question, I think, what brought us down this path was how government spending is being allocated for storage. And there's clearly priorities around hydrogen, nuclear, and others that are expensive. And I guess the question I'm going to with this is, the storage is a solution, but we're not deploying resources against it.
Right.
And is that because there's too much faith or trust in batteries, or is there an education challenge at the policy level?
I think it's a question of the difference you have is you have China, who as a communist country is not as market focused, but they'll take a 20-year view. They'll look and go, in 20 years, we're going to need long duration energy storage. So let's start building it now. The United States is very market focused. We look at what the markets do. So what does the market need to do? We need to get to a point where the arbitrage value, the difference between the low price of electricity during the day and the high price of electricity during the day is far enough apart where storage becomes valuable. And we're actually seeing that in ERCOT. Last year, ERCOT, if you had a 10-hour long duration storage, you could have made $62 per megawatt hour. Now, most of the technologies are running at the $100 level. The Department of Energy has a target that they want to get the cost down to where a $50 per megawatt hour income would be financially economic for long duration energy storage. Cavern's in that $50 range. So last year we saw $62 value. Batteries were getting like $200 during the day. If you had a battery and you could buy electricity during the cheapest 1 hour during the day and sell during the most expensive, over the year you'd have made over $250 per megawatt hour. And that's why we're seeing a huge deployment of batteries right now. They're economic. But by the more batteries you deploy, then that they are starting to take care of those peaks, and actually the arbitrage value is coming down right now. So you want the arbitrage value to be high, but that means the electricity prices are volatile. And for the consumers, that's not good. So to get to a market that needs long duration energy storage, we've got to get to a point of volatility in our electricity pricing that will make the consumers miserable. So in the long duration,
and that's not your goal.
That's
right?
not my goal. That's not my goal. No.
Right.
That's why I would like to see us building it now. And within the long duration energy storage community, there is now discuss of storage as transmission. You'll hear that phrase. And what they're saying is they want long duration energy storage to be funded like transmission lines are funded. It is a benefit to the whole grid, so the whole grid should pay for it. I've seen one proposal where they were like, all the solar and wind guys should like all be chipping in $1 per megawatt hour. They should be like paying like $1 per megawatt hour tax on all their electricity to fund long duration energy storage to reduce that volatility. But we're not seeing any support from that from the Department of Energy right now. I mean, they're talking about it, they're thinking about it, but we're not doing it. And I think that's probably one of the next steps is if we want to avoid the volatility to the consumers, we're going to need to get to a point where there is some sort of market mechanism to encourage long duration energy storage. We're getting batteries right now. We're getting more batteries. The batteries have helped out a couple times this summer with ERCOT. But I think we're going to need more than that in the future.
Yes, it's more like a market mechanism issue, and that's also where we need innovation as we're moving to more renewables and we're going to be dependent on more storage. But I guess, back to the question of, what you said earlier, our government is putting on a lot of funds on other renewable technologies, but unable to see the value of pump storage or long-term duration.
Carbon capture and hydrogen, the oil companies have been advocating for that because they see that as a mechanism to clean up their industry and help them remain in business.
So there's no one lobbying for this.
There's no one lobbying for long duration.
No one legacy business necessarily.
Right.
It's disruptive.
I wouldn't say disruptive.
In the technology sense, it's disruptive. Yes.
Well, but I would say long duration energy storage is more like a giant shock absorber for the grid. It's a way to smooth out the grid. And if you were building a bare bones car, the shock absorber is probably the last thing you put in. Although the guy driving the car would really like you to put it in immediately. So, yeah.
Oh, we all like karting over here.
Are you ready to lead the decarbonization charge? Energy Tech Nexus is your platform for growth, offering unique resources and expertise for energy and carbon tech founders. Join us at energytechnexus.com and start building your Thunder Lizard.
So in terms of your fundraising journey, I know we talked early, I guess a year ago, when you were exploring different types of capital. And I think in your introduction, you talked about pursuing grants.
Yeah.
Has that been your primary focus?
We spoke to a lot of investors. The challenge is the long duration energy storage is the long-term play. It doesn't have a high rate of return. If you have investors who are used to software companies and to other stuff where you have 10, 20% return on investment in a rapid manner, that's not what we're working on right now. We're working on something that's more of a utility play. It's a lower rate of return over a longer duration. And the other thing I heard from the investors was, come see us when you've gotten some Department of Energy funding. They want to see that DOE funding to not only de-risk the technology, but to give them a good feel for it. I mean, a lot of these guys are not engineering experts. So they want to know that somebody else, Department of Energy in this case, has essentially blessed this technology and said, yeah, this will work. So that's what I was hearing from a lot of the investors, a lot of the energy investors who have oil and gas experience, because I really think this technology, because it utilizes drilling, it utilizes seismic studies of the salt domes, it has a lot of potential. I mean, except for the hydroelectric turbine, everything else is right off the shelf from an oil and gas field technology standpoint. But at the moment, I think they need to see that de-risking. And I'm of the mindset now where, because of how the markets are going, I think we're probably going to see a market. Natural gas prices have got to get up to $3, $4, $5 per MCF. And then I think the market will form. So at the moment, I think I need the grant funding to do the engineering, to get positioned to build a demonstration unit. And then at that point, once the natural gas prices go up, then we will see a clear market for long duration storage.
And I think you mentioned already, for some of these grant fundings, you're looking for partnerships with universities.
Actually, that's not the problem at all.
Yeah.
I have Texas A&M wants to work with us, Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Argonne National Laboratory, Sandia National Laboratory. I've got plenty of the technology suppliers, the national labs, the universities that want to work with us. The challenge is somebody needs to bring some money to the table. And that's what we're lacking.
And so for the grants, like, do the grants require matching funds that you've been looking at, or are they pure grants?
So we're looking at the pure grants at the moment. SBIR, STTR, some philanthropy grants we've applied for. So that's what we're looking at the moment. Matching funds later on, yeah, we'll do matching funds too if we need to. But at the moment, we're looking at the pure grants.
Yeah. And tell us about how that process has been in terms of identifying what grants to pursue, applying for them.
So that's been a little bit of a fun thing. So what Department of Energy does is they come out with these funding opportunities. And the funding opportunities they're usually looking for something. I mean, I've seen them where a funding opportunity is, we want to fund an opportunity for floating solar. Okay, well, that doesn't do me any good. So the STTR and SBIR grants, they have a list of priorities. They just came out with a list of priorities, but it was focused around nuclear, fusion, some biomedical stuff. So nothing on energy storage. There'll be a second list released in November. I'm hoping that there'll be some topics on there that we can apply for. But that's the thing, is you've got to see where the funding providers, National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, some of these philanthropic organizations, they're looking for something. And if that matches up, you can apply. But if it doesn't match up, well, then you're waiting around. But that's fine. I mean, that's the way it goes. I mean, they have interests, they have ideas, they have thoughts about where they think the economy, where the technology needs to go. And that's what they're looking for.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that also requires kind of exposure of this technology to the DOE, who's then deciding. Is what Jason, you said earlier, is like the lack of knowledge too, right? Like not knowing enough about a technology.
Yeah, and it's also the fact of you need a champion. You need a champion within the organization. I mean, I was in an oil company for 16 years. If a project did not have a champion, the project died. I mean, that was just the way it was. You'd have a guy who was like, oh, we want to drill a well here. Well, unless he could convince somebody up in the management, yes, this will produce oil. we never drilled the well.
Yeah. So how do you develop those champions within these government organizations, and have you engaged with the PMs?
So 2 weeks ago, I was in Bellevue, Washington at the Energy Storage Grand Challenge Summit meeting in Bellevue. Met with a lot of the DOE people up there, talked with them. I'm going in 2 weeks. I will be in Los Angeles at the Long Duration Energy Storage Consortium Workshop. So Department of Energy has funded the national labs to form the consortium to work on long duration energy storage. And they will be holding their first workshop in Los Angeles, September 10th and 11th. And I'll be over there, and I'm actually going to get to speak. They've asked me to speak on my technology. So you just keep working the conferences, keep talking to people, keep trying to move the ball forward and get more people to know about the technology and interested. I know at the Conservative Energy Networks summit that was just held here in Houston, I got a chance to speak with Commissioner Gladfeldt. I spoke with Congressman Weber. I'm trying to get them to start thinking about long duration energy storage.
Yeah, and I think the lesson here is, like, even with government grants, there's still people who are reviewing the grants. They're trying to execute against a strategy that maybe they have internally for how to deploy capital. And when you have this kind of vision for something that's long term, you do have to educate and inform, and that's half the battle of being an entrepreneur, right? Is teaching the market this is why the future needs to exist.
When I first started talking about this technology, invariably I'd have somebody go, "What's a salt dome?" If you're not in the Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi area, you probably haven't heard about salt domes. So that was the first challenge I've had, and then talking about doing it underground. We've had some times where we've had to explain the technology to people, and that's understandable.
Also, talk to us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey, because you've spent most of your career working for a mid-sized oil and gas company.
So my career was split in two areas. One was problem solving. They would walk up to me and say, "This isn't working, please figure out why." So I learned how to do a lot of problem solving. And the other was doing a big project, which is, we found oil and gas here. Here's a big pot of money. Go build us a platform. Go build us a way to get the oil and gas from the wellheads to the cash register. And in fact, you and I, Jason, had a conversation about 2.5 years ago?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Where I said, I could build this thing in my sleep. And you said, no, your job isn't to build it in your sleep. Your job is to convince people to give you money.
Yep.
That's not a skill I've developed. I'm still working on that one. So it's and as I just said, I can build this thing in my sleep. I've got the design plans worked out. I know all where the roadblocks are going to be. I know the technology path. It's the financial path. It's the how do you convince people to give you money path. And that's the challenge I'm having at the moment. And that's why we need a grant to get us started, to get us moving in that road. One of the things about the grant that I need to understand is the grant not only gives you money to work with, it gives you credibility. And that's the whole thing where the investors want to see a grant. They want to see some money being given. Not only that, the salt suppliers, the people that buy salt on the market, but if I go talk to them right now, it's, they're like, "Who are you?" If I'm like, "Oh yeah, we have a grant from the DOE to develop this technology." Okay, now they're going to pay attention. Yeah. So the grant not only gives you money to work with, it gives you that necessary credibility. Because let's be honest, there's some people running around in the long duration energy storage market. I'm sorry, they're selling a technology that can't work. And we've seen a couple of those coming in the Houston area. So we do have that issue. I mean, Solyndra with the solar panels, Theranos with the medical technology. We've seen some people get a lot of funding and then burn out. And that makes the investors very worried, which it should be.
Yeah, yeah. But I think one of the questions we didn't get to is what made you take that leap to go from industry to say, like, is it the problem that you need to solve, or what drove you?
It was so, and this leads into the book, actually. 4 years ago, I was working a project. It was a difficult project. And I just realized I'd had enough. I'd done enough in the oil and gas industry. There were questions about climate change, questions about a lot of stuff. And I stepped away from the oil and gas industry because I needed a break. And B, I needed to answer those questions. So actually, I started doing research on temperatures across Texas, across the Midwest, looking at all the temperature data, trying to figure out, is climate change real or not? I mean, we keep being told, believe in climate change, but if you're in the oil and gas industry, you also have people telling you to believe that it's a hoax. So what do you believe? Well, I don't want to believe, I want the data. I want to look at the numbers. Goes back to the whole thing of the oil companies use me as a problem solver. And what I learned very quickly was when you go into a facility that's had a event, the operators, you're going to walk up to the operator and go, what happened? And he's going to go, I don't know. And it's A, because he doesn't know, or B, he doesn't want to go to jail or he doesn't want to get fired. So you need to go pull in all the data to understand what happened. And then you can ask the guy intelligent questions. Did you open that valve? Did you close that valve? What did you do? And then you can figure out what happened. So same thing with climate change. I went and pulled down all the temperature data to see, are we having climate change? And the short answer is yes, we are, but it's not consistent. And then doing that led me into other issues of immigration, taxes, gerrymandering, ranked choice voting, all of this stuff. And that led me to write the book, Fixing America.
Do you want to show the book to the camera over here? We got Fixing America. There we go. For YouTube. Yeah.
So that led me to write the book, Fixing America. It was published January 30th of this year.
Congrats.
It was a lot of data, a lot of research. And that was helping me to come to grips with leaving the oil industry. At the same time, I was looking at the electric market, the energy markets, and I went, long duration energy storage, that's the way to go. And that led me to start working on how do you do long duration energy storage, which led me to found Cavern 2.5 years ago. So that's what the journey was. It was, I got dissatisfied with the oil industry. I'd worked 32 years straight and no break between jobs and everything. And I was like, I'm done. But yeah, it was an interesting journey. Writing the book forced me to look at beliefs that I had been taught, that I'd come to believe and come to accept. And then when I went to find the data to support them, I couldn't. And that was really shocking when you're like, when you're raised a certain way and you're taught this is how things are. And then when you go to find the data, you're like, oh, this is not how things are. It was a really interesting experience.
So it was kind of the search for the different data that led you to all these different topics and based on what you found and what you didn't find.
So if you're looking in healthcare, one of the things you see is high rates of obesity, diabetes that have increased in the last 60 years. Well, why is that? Well, then you start looking at the food industry. Well, 60% of our diet is now what's called ultra processed food, Twinkies and stuff like that, where, the food has been essentially processed to the point of not really having any link to the original food stuff it started from. So once you get those links together, you're realizing, okay, well, why did that happen? And with the ultra processed food, you realize that in the 1970s, Russia was having these famines. So the Nixon administration, there was the head of Secretary of Agriculture, a guy named Earl Butz, went to the farmers and said, go big or go home. Grow fence row to fence row. I want as much as you can grow. And they changed how the federal subsidies worked to encourage more crop growth.
We were talking about how the farmland, the agriculture industry was transformed to generate more crop yield.
Yep. So that happened that was the key of creating these massive crops growth. What happened then was Russia recovered from its famines. Well, now you've got all this extra corn. Well, what are you going to do with it? Well, hey, there's a new food industry here. They'll take that corn, they'll process it, they'll turn it into Twinkies or whatever. I don't want to get sued by Twinkies, but anyway, whatever these ultra processed foods are. It also was the start of the whole cattle market where we now use feedlots. So where we used to have cattle on open range, now they're in a feedlot and they're fed that corn. So that changed our whole food industry. It wasn't done intentionally. It wasn't done with any conspiracy theory or anything. It was just how factors came out. Now, here it is 50 years later, we have higher levels of obesity, higher levels of diabetes. It was that type of links of finding how one thing linked to another. It was an amazing experience.
Yep. I think the challenge of American innovations. We're really good at making a lot of stuff very cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And once you figure out how to do that and make things very cheaply, then you got to find a way to sell it, right? And it's kind of a race to the bottom on cost, be it calories or kilowatts or barrels of oil. And it's amazing what people come up with too to figure out how to get it consumed. But we struggle with what happens after, right?
Yeah, it's like we're innovative.
Yeah, very innovative. It's crazy how innovative we are.
It's the knock-on effects. It's the unforeseen consequences that surprise us.
But you can't blame them either,
right?
In some ways, because how would you know?
Yeah, but I think at the end of the day, like with climate change too, it's us being smarter as humans, right? And looking at, like you're saying, looking at 20-year view and understanding like what are going to be the consequences of what we're doing.
Let's talk about climate change for just a moment. So I view climate change as an equation. And the equation is how much energy does each person on the planet use, how much CO2 do they release, how much waste heat do they release, times the number of people on the planet. That's climate change. In 1960, we were 3 billion people on the planet. Now we're over 8 billion people. And a lot of those people living in China and India have massively increased the amount of energy per person they use because their lifestyles have become so much better. They're moving toward a more Western lifestyle. So we can say, we need to address climate change and we can attack the fossil fuel companies. The reality is it is the consumers and the increasing populations that are really the factor behind climate change, but that's not what we want to talk about. It's so much easier to cast the oil companies as the villain. And that falls right back into a basic Hollywood story.
Yeah. Do you, I think I saw, 10 years ago, the New York Times ranked policy changes that had the biggest effect on carbon output. And number one was China's one-child policy.
Yes.
Had the biggest impact on carbon production. And number two was the fall of the Soviet Union because it slowed down the economy and the production, the Soviet production system.
Yeah.
And I think it goes to your point that the biggest challenge is people want stuff. Stuff takes energy and carbon. And so you either got to have less stuff or you got to have less people. And no one ever wants to address the less people problem.
In 2021, we saw cooling in some areas. Why? Because we had a massive drop in energy use in 2020 during COVID.
Yeah.
The lockdown actually had a direct impact. There were areas in India where the smog went down drastically. They could see 5 or 6 miles across the city. So that is definitely one of the impacts. We've got to, and it's a question of, we've got to recognize that population is an issue, and we've got to recognize that we have to be smarter in our energy use, more efficient in our energy use.
Yeah, I mean, because at the end of the day, it's the American consumers that consume a lot more energy than anyone in India and China does today, right? It's just because of our lifestyle.
Yes.
But their expectation is they want to catch up.
Yes,
no one's going to say you
absolutely.
want
to catch up.
Right?
Absolutely. But what kind of model are we setting, right? That everyone wants to drive for the kind of lifestyle that we have here that is not good for the environment.
In fact, Nada, one of the points to your favor is the U.S. is 4.7% of the world population. We use 20% of the oil. So that is a thing that we've got to adjust because now the Chinese and the Indians all want to use more food stuff.
Yeah. And, to that, I know you've shared these stories with us before at the Energy Tech Nexus, but we often ask our guests about their kind of climate change story. And you've been someone who's been in the middle of the eye of the storm, literally. So talk to us about that, your experience of, being in Beryl and all the other hurricanes that you've experienced and how that might have impacted
you. I grew up in New Orleans. I lived in New Orleans until Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina put 6 feet of water through my 1-story house. Wow. Came to Houston, had a house along Buffalo Bayou, was in the process of selling it when Harvey put 5 feet of water through that house. So hurricanes are something.
Hold on, insurance companies, be wary.
Yeah.
Don't insure anyone near William.
I've told my wife, I said, this house in Houston we're in at the moment, we're probably going to want to be on a mountain somewhere because I've had enough of hurricanes. Beryl went right over my house. I walked out and was in the eye of the storm. That's the second time in my life that's happened. The derecho in May, I was actually walking out on Addicks Reservoir when that caught me out on the reservoir. So yeah, I've had a lot of weather experiences, but I think what we can clearly see is that the people who talk about we've had these massive climate events. We have had massive climate events, But in my data research and everything, I found heat waves in the 1930s that killed thousands and thousands of people that because it was so long ago, we've forgotten about it. So there's a lot of interesting data around the weather events and a lot of conflicting data, which is how I was looking into it as much as I could. But yeah, I think what we've got to see is we've got to be smarter about things. North Carolina, we're seeing houses get swept off into the sea because the coastal erosion. Coastal erosion happens. It always is going to happen. We're seeing a lot more damage from hurricanes, and people have been saying, oh, it's bigger hurricanes. No, it's actually because more people now live in those target zones. And the thing we're seeing right now, which is going to be fun, is flood insurance. Some people in Florida are having trouble getting insurance. And that's going to force people to, flood insurance was something that was federally subsidized. And as a result, people could rebuild. They could live in a danger zone without consequence. Now we're seeing that change. And I think it needs to change because people need to understand the consequence. If you have a wonderful beach home and you're looking out on the Gulf of Mexico, great, but you're at risk.
Yeah. And you got to bear the risk and not the rest of us. So let's talk a little bit about Houston. How have you seen the innovation ecosystem here evolve over the last few years? So I came out of the oil patch and working for a mid-sized oil company, and we were actually talking about this earlier, is that mid-sized oil companies don't like to be serial number one. They have enough risks that they're carrying. They want a proven technology. So that was the thing I saw there. We saw a lot of innovation. We saw the shale industry, massive innovation there. But now that I'm outside of oil and gas and working with the startups and everything, you're seeing there's a caution. We need more money for the real young startups so they could try out their ideas so we can know whether it's valid or not. And we're not seeing that. I think we need more of that in Houston. We need more capital that can be put at risk to help these new young startups just go, is this storage system work? Does that new technology work? And it's hard. It's hard for these guys to do. And do you think that's a market challenge or a technology challenge? Because I think in some ways Houston, will fund risk when if it's about leases, right, or understanding where there's good land, and they know how to drill a well in it. But so I think it's a question of like Sage, Fervo Energy, those companies, they had good ties to the oil industry. A lot of them are major oil company executives, so they had ties to access to funds and all that to help get those technologies off the ground. But you see some of these smaller startups where they don't have those personal connections and they're having trouble getting that initial funding. I think we need a fund that's in the Houston area that says an innovation fund that'll say, okay, I'll give you $200,000 to get you started. I'll give you a little bit of money just to see, with the understanding of you're not going to see your return on investment.
I like that because you need that to be able to apply for the grant money, right? To be able to sustain you so that you could apply for that, $2-3 million grant money that you need to actually get a demo.
We have some angel networks in the area, but they want 1% of the company. They want to see a return on investment. They want a end goal. And sometimes when you're at the very start with the technology, you don't have that end goal. You can tell a lie and go, oh yeah, we're going to make millions. We're going to make billions of dollars. But you really don't know because there's some technical humps that you've got to clear. You got to get past. We don't have good funding to get companies through those initial points. I think that's the one thing. Other than that, I think we've got a lot of people working in this area. I think we've got Energy Tech Nexus. We've got some other incubators in the area. I think it's a good setup. So one of the things I think you're hitting on is there's not a lot of prize money in the Houston ecosystem. Yes, there's the Rice Business Plan competition. Only I think 3 or 4 Houston companies get to apply to that, and you got to be a student. Right. I remember in New England when I was there, you could spend your whole summer winning prize money and never have to go off and raise angel capital and still show up with $250K. Right. Right. And that was between different prizes. I did Mass Challenge, I did Clean Tech Open, and then there were additional grants that you could put aside that the state itself had funded. And here it's rare. Yeah, I think it's really just. Well, we've seen a little bitty the pitch contest. Here's $5,000 there, $10,000 there. That's not the $250 you need. Right. That's not going to get you to go sit down with Texas A&M and fund a metallurgy study. You need a lot of money to play that game. Yeah. So I think we do need more of that. We need more of that initial funding, awards, prizes, grants. That would be great. But there's a lot of people working in the area. I think there's a lot of recognition that the energy transition is going to happen. I think we definitely are. I think some of the oil and gas companies are starting to recognize that. They're starting to realize that, this is going to change.
So taking it aside a little bit, are there any hidden gems in the ecosystem that you've discovered?
Oh, not really. And because that's the point of me, we've been trying to make some headway in the area. I think they need to see, again, it's the credibility. You need it. Once you have credibility, doors open. Until you get that initial credibility, it's not really there. It's the challenge, as you were saying, the prize money, the stuff like that. You need that to get some of these unknowns, these people they don't have the oil company connections, the executive management connections. Those guys are the ones needing the help. Yeah.
What is the one thing our audience could support you on in helping you meet your goals?
I think the big thing is we need to get a long duration energy storage market. Not for me, but for everybody in that space. My big concern is that we're going to have a situation where when we need long duration energy storage, when the electric grid reaches the point where the volatility from the wind and the solar and where natural gas prices have risen to the point where the consumers are feeling the pain, you're 5 years away from getting long duration energy storage. So that's my one fear, is that we don't start soon enough to avoid that pain. My thing would be, if you think I'm right, write your Texas legislature member. So we have what's called the Texas Energy Fund. We passed a constitutional amendment to allow the Texas Public Utility Commission to manage a fund to fund natural gas power plants. That's fine, but where are they going to get the natural gas in 20 years? That's my question. Energy storage, long duration energy storage is excluded from that at the moment. Write your Texas legislature member. Write the Texas Public Utility Commission. Ask them to open the door so that long duration energy storage can be considered for those funds as part of these new initiatives that the Texas PUC and the Texas ERCOT people are developing, so that we recognize that long duration energy storage is the future. That to me is the big challenge right there.
And where can people come to find you on the internet?
So cavernenergy.com is the website. We've got a little 3-minute YouTube video that explains the technology. There's a way to contact us through the website. I will be speaking at the On Duration Energy Storage Consortium in September 10th. The book is available. Fixing America is available at Amazon.com. It's also available at Barnes & Noble. You can also go to Brazos Bookstore and the Blue Willow Bookstore here in Houston and order them locally.
Cool. All right. Well,
and we'll have to bring you back on to talk in more detail about the book.
About the book.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you so
William.
much.
Thank y'all.